Go through Psalm 23 verse 4 today, continuing that study. It says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Now we talked about a couple weeks ago, that he restores my soul, leads me in paths of righteousness, and then before that, about being in green pastures and alongside still waters. And then it just takes a swift turn in the opposite direction. God is with you in the times of plenty. That is true. We all know this. Sometimes we forget, but He's also with us when we can't see where we're going, where we can't see where He's leading us, where we can't see what the point of this season is, where we can't see, or even and especially when we're in valleys. Not only is there sometimes where we're in valleys, or we're in places where we don't know what's next, but we're in valleys. We're simply struggling. There's times of low points, whether it's caused by decisions you made, caused by decisions others made, loss of loved ones, loss of things close to you. So David understood, as a shepherd, that you had to go through valleys, because shepherds led sheep into valleys. Isn't that interesting, though? He's talking, of course, we realize that this is about the Lord as our shepherd. And he says, they walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Not only did he realize that valleys were part of life, he understood that he was led to them. And if you're going to be, God leads you to something, He will lead you through it. Whether it's your own choices that got you there or something out of your control, God is still with you. Because he says that later in the same verse. He says, "For thou art with me." The shepherds had to lead sheep into valleys sometimes. The grass is usually more fruitful down there because all the rain would run down the cliff tops and sides of mountains to the valleys. And often it was cooler down there because, especially where he was, it can be really hot in the desert. And the valleys would be a cooler place for sheep, which makes sense as sheep are animals of wool, which is not exactly a light fabric. But sheep didn't like them. Sheep didn't like going down into them, rather. Just like we don't. They are skittish. They didn't understand. They didn't like not being able to see where they were going. They certainly didn't like shadows. And so it was a process of going into the valley. But David understood, using both the metaphor of the Lord as his shepherd and as being a shepherd in the literal form himself, that it's just a part of how it goes. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This verse is often used because it's phrases like that one, this psalm rather, for funerals and things of that nature, which is totally understandable. I've lost loved ones, and God has led me through valleys as a result of losing those people that were close to me. And I know, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just important to remember that those valleys don't necessarily have to include the loss of a loved one or the loss of a person. It could just be anything that God brings you through to strengthen you. You can have dreams fall through your fingers. You can have plans go completely awry. It could be the results of decisions you made and others. But he understood that it was inevitable. It's an inevitable part of life that he will be led through valleys in the shadows. What's interesting about this, we tend to overlook sometimes in going through this psalm, is that he says, "I will fear no evil." David realized that even though he couldn't see where he was going, this valley, not only though it was cooler, though it had more sustenance at times, and you could probably have more and you will likely have more fellowship with the Lord in the valleys than you ever will in the mountaintops. He understood that valleys are also places you can see as well. You couldn't see where you were going. You couldn't see how you were going to get through it. You couldn't see how big it was necessarily. And just like life, we like to see things. We like to be able to see what's next. That's why walking by faith and not by sight is either in principle or in teaching throughout this whole Bible. But he understood that he had nothing to fear. In Psalm 27:1, he says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" He understood that deeply. Why, though? Because he understood that the Lord was, he said, "For thou art with me. He understood that even though he couldn't see, even though he didn't know what was next, even though he didn't know the purpose of it, whether figuratively, metaphorically, or literally, and he understood that God, his shepherd, was with him. And then we get to the verse, part of the verse where it says, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." The staff had a crook on it, which would gently bring sheep that were trying to stray back into the fold. We've all faced times where we need gentle nudges in the right direction from the Lord or from others, and sometimes from the Lord through others. And that's what the staff would generally be used for. The rod, if a certain sheep would keep going astray, keep disobeying, going opposite of what the sheep needed to do, the shepherd would break its legs, all of them, which is painful. Then he would bind them up and carry the particular sheep over his shoulders until the legs were healed. Sometimes God needs to do that in our lives. Sometimes I know I have, but sometimes we all have seasons in our lives where we get to the point where we're so stubborn about certain things or about our walk in general, where God has to just completely rip the pride right out of us, just to get us to understand that He is truly has our best at heart. And when that sheep would heal after being close to the shepherd like that, wouldn't stray anymore. The Lord is our shepherd, and even in the valleys, we have nothing to fear, for He is with us, whether it is by gentle persuasion or the breaking of our prideful and rebellious hearts. God is with us, and He loves us. He loves me, He loves all of you and each of you so much. See you next time.